The velvet box hit the floor before Elena even understood what she was looking at. It was not the box that stopped her breath. It was the ring inside it, glinting under the chandelier lights of the Silver Fang Great Hall, resting now in the open palm of a woman who was not her. Vanessa held it up like a prize she had already won, turning it so the silver caught the light, so every wolf in that room could see exactly what it was. The Luna ring. Her ring. The one carved from moonstone and old silver, passed down through 5 generations of Silver Fang Lunas. The one Damon had slid onto her finger 3 years ago, on the night he claimed her as his mate. The one she had not taken off since. Except she had taken it off, 2 days ago. Damon had asked to have it cleaned before the founding ceremony, and she had trusted him, because trust was the one thing she had never learned to withhold from him, even when she probably should have. Now it sat on Vanessa's finger, and Damon stood beside her with his jaw tight and his eyes refusing to meet Elena's, and 40 members of the pack stood frozen around them, waiting to see what their Luna would do. Elena did not scream. She did not lunge across the hall the way some small, furious part of her wanted to. She stood very still, the way she had been taught to stand since she was a child in the Ashwood pack, learning that a Luna's power was never in her volume. It was in her stillness. It was in the moment, right before she moved. Elena. Damon said her name like an apology that had not yet decided to be one. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you gave my ring to your mistress in front of our entire pack, Elena said. Her voice did not shake. She was almost proud of that, distantly, the way you notice small things during an earthquake. Is there another way it looks? Vanessa's smile did not waver. She had planned this. Elena could see that now, see it in the way Vanessa held her hand up a little higher, angling the ring so it would catch the light from every side of the room. This was not a mistake. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a coronation, staged in front of witnesses, and Elena was the guest who had wandered into someone else's celebration. Damon and I have been talking, Vanessa said, and her voice carried the practiced sweetness of someone who has rehearsed cruelty until it sounds like kindness. About the future of this pack, about what it needs from its Luna. I think you'll understand, in time, that this is for the best. For the best. Elena turned those words over in her mind, and found nothing in them but ash. She looked at Damon. Really looked at him, the way she used to look at him when they were young, and he was just a boy from a rival pack who made her laugh during border negotiations, before he was an alpha, before he was a husband, before he was a man standing 3 feet from his mistress while his mate absorbed a public humiliation designed to break her. How long? Elena said quietly. Elena, please, not here. How long, Damon? The silence that followed told her more than any answer could have. She watched something shift in the faces of the pack members around her, watched pity bloom in some eyes, and satisfaction in others, because every pack has its share of wolves who enjoy watching a Luna fall. She had known that. She had simply never expected to be the one falling. Grace, her closest friend among the pack healers, stepped forward as if to intervene, but Elena raised one hand, just slightly, and Grace stopped. Not now. Not like this. Elena would not give this room the satisfaction of watching her come apart. Take the ring off, Elena said to Vanessa. Her voice was calm. Too calm, maybe, for what was happening, but calm was the only thing keeping her upright. Damon gave it to me, Vanessa said, still smiling. I don't answer to you. You don't have to, but that ring only responds to Luna blood. Wear it long enough, and you'll understand exactly what I mean. Elena let the words sit there, not quite a threat, not quite a warning, simply a fact that Vanessa would discover on her own time, in her own pain. Then Elena turned to Damon one final time. You could have told me, quietly, like a man who at least respected 15 years of my life. Instead you did this. Damon opened his mouth, and for one unbearable second, Elena thought he might actually explain himself, might actually offer some version of the truth that would make any of this survivable. Instead, he said nothing, and that silence became the last thing she would ever need from him. She turned and walked out of the great hall. Not fast, not slow, just steady, one foot after another, past the rows of pack members who parted for her the way people part for grief, because everyone in that hall understood, in that moment, that they were watching the end of something. Outside, the night air hit her skin like something almost merciful. The moon was high and full, indifferent to everything happening beneath it, and Elena stood on the stone steps of the pack house and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. She did not cry. She would not give Damon that either. Behind her, she heard the doors open, and Nora, her younger cousin, and the closest thing she had to a sister within Silverfang territory, came rushing out with a coat in her hands, as though she thought Elena might be cold, as though cold was the problem tonight. Elena, wait. Please, let me help you. I'm fine, Nora. You are not fine. Nobody would be fine. What he did in there was... Nora's voice cracked with an anger Elena herself had not yet allowed to surface. Everyone saw it. Everyone. He humiliated you on purpose. Elena nodded slowly, looking out over the dark tree line that marked the edge of Silverfang territory. Somewhere beyond that tree line was land that did not belong to her pack, land ruled by an alpha whose name was rarely spoken above a whisper, because fear does strange things to language. I need to think, Elena said. About what? About what happens next. She finally looked at her cousin, and something in her expression must have frightened Nora a little, because Nora's grip on the coat tightened. You're scaring me. Good, Elena said, and for the first time that night, something like a smile touched her mouth, though there was no warmth in it. Because I think I'm done being scared myself. She did not go back inside. She walked instead toward the stables at the edge of the property, where her mare, a dark bay named Ash, stood waiting in her stall, unaware that the world had just tilted sideways. Elena pressed her forehead against the horse's neck and breathed in the familiar scent of hay and leather, the one thing in her life tonight that had not betrayed her. Behind her, faintly, she could still hear the murmur of the great hall, the low buzz of 40 wolves discussing what they had just witnessed, deciding among themselves what it meant for the future of the pack, for the balance of power, for her. Let them talk, she thought. Let them decide whatever story feels comfortable to them. She was done needing their permission to survive her own life. She did not saddle Ash that night, not yet. Instead, she sat on an overturned crate in the stable, still in her formal dress, the fabric no longer feeling like something beautiful, but something borrowed from a life she was no longer sure she wanted to keep. She thought about the ring, about the way it had looked on Vanessa's hand, foreign and wrong, like a key placed in a lock it did not belong to. She thought about the years before Vanessa, about the early mornings, when Damon used to bring her tea before pack meetings, because he knew she hated speaking on an empty stomach. About the way he used to defend her decisions to the elders, even when he privately disagreed with them, because loyalty, he told her once, was not about always agreeing. It was about always standing beside someone, especially when it cost you something to do it. He had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. Or perhaps he had never truly believed it, and she had simply wanted to believe he did. Nora found her there an hour later, sitting quietly among the horses, dry-eyed and unnervingly calm. The elders want to speak with you, Nora said gently. They're saying it needs to be handled delicately. Politically, they're worried about what it means for pack unity if this gets out. Elena almost laughed. It already got out, Nora. 40 people watched it happen. I know. I'm just telling you what they're saying. Tell them I'll speak with them tomorrow. Elena stood, brushing hay from her dress, and looked at her cousin with a steadiness that seemed to settle something in Nora's worried expression. Tonight, I need air, that's all. I promise I'm not doing anything foolish. It was, she would later admit to herself, not entirely true. Because even as she said the words, some quiet, resolute part of her was already turning toward the tree line, toward the dark stretch of unclaimed land beyond Silverfang borders, toward the direction of a territory no Silverfang wolf dared to enter uninvited. She did not know yet that she would cross that border tonight. She only knew that something in her chest, something that had spent 15 years being careful, being patient, being the Luna everyone expected her to be, had finally gone still and quiet, in a way that felt less like grief, and more like a decision waiting to be made. Inside the great hall, the celebration Vanessa had staged continued without her, the music resuming, the wine flowing, Damon standing at the center of it all, with an expression that looked, to anyone paying close attention, less like triumph, and more like a man beginning, too late, to understand the size of what he had just lost. Elena did not look back at the pack house, as she led Ash out of the stable and into the cool night. She did not look back at the lit windows, or the laughter drifting faintly across the lawn, or the life she had built here brick by brick for 15 years. She looked instead toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the property, toward the unknown territory beyond it, and for the first time all night, she felt something that was not quite peace, but was close enough to it, that she was willing to follow it wherever it led. Whatever waited for her out there, she told herself, it could not possibly hurt more than what waited for her inside. She swung up onto Ash's back, gathered the reins in steady hands, and rode into the dark. The forest swallowed the sound of the pack house within minutes. Elena let Ash pick her own pace along the narrow trail, the mare's hooves soft against packed earth, and for a while, Elena did not think about direction at all. She thought about the 15 years she had spent building a life inside Silverfang territory, about the mornings and the meetings, and the small daily proofs of loyalty she had offered a man who, it turned out, had been keeping a second life running quietly beside the first. She thought about the way Vanessa had smiled. Not nervous, not guilty, certain. As though she had been rehearsing that moment in a mirror for months, waiting for the night it would finally be hers to perform. Elena wondered how many people had known. Grace, she was fairly sure, had not. Nora certainly had not, judging by the raw shock on her face. But others had. She could tell now, replaying the room in her mind, which faces had shown surprise, and which had shown only a careful, practiced neutrality, the kind of neutrality that comes from already knowing a secret, and simply waiting to see how it lands. She had been the last to know about her own marriage. That thought settled into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything she had believed about the last 15 years. Ash slowed as the trail narrowed, brush pressing close on either side, and Elena realized, with the distant clarity of someone waking from a long sleep, that she had crossed further than she intended. The scent of Silverfang territory, the particular blend of pine and riverstone and home that she had known her whole adult life, had faded somewhere behind her. In its place was something colder, sharper, unfamiliar in a way that made the hair on her arms rise. Nightshade land. She should have turned back then. Every instinct trained into her since childhood told her to turn back, to respect the border, to remember that the Nightshade Pack was not simply a neighboring territory, but a place spoken of in low voices at Silverfang gatherings, ruled by an alpha whose name alone was enough to quiet a room full of children. Kale. She had never met him. Few outside his own pack had, not in any setting that mattered. What she knew of him came from rumor, and rumor painted him as something between a legend and a warning, an alpha who had taken his throne through means the elders refused to discuss in detail, who ruled with a silence that unsettled people more than shouting ever could. She should have turned back. Instead, she kept riding, because some reckless, wounded part of her had decided that tonight, of all nights, she did not particularly care what waited for her in the dark. She had already survived the worst thing that could happen to a woman who trusted too easily. What was a little more danger, measured against that? The trees thinned ahead, opening onto a wide clearing, bathed in moonlight, and Elena reined Ash to a stop at the edge of it, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. A Silverfang wolf, alone, unarmed, deep in Nightshade territory, in the middle of the night, wearing a formal dress that marked her clearly as someone of rank. If anyone found her here, it would not go well. She was turning Ash back toward the trees, finally recovering the sense she should have kept a mile ago, when a voice came from somewhere behind her, low and even, carrying easily across the clearing despite its quiet volume. "You're a long way from home, Luna." Elena's whole body went still. She turned Ash slowly, her heart hammering in a way it had not, strangely, during the humiliation in the Great Hall. That had been a pain she understood. This was something else entirely, an unfamiliar current of fear, and something she could not yet name. A man stood at the tree line, half in shadow, half touched by moonlight, tall in the way that made distance difficult to judge, and even from where she sat astride her mare, Elena could feel the particular stillness that surrounded him, the kind of stillness that belonged only to alphas who had never once needed to prove their power out loud. "I didn't mean to cross," Elena said, and she was almost impressed with how steady her own voice sounded, given the circumstances. "I'll leave your territory now." "You could." He stepped forward, out of the shadow of the trees, and moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, dark eyes, that seemed to take in far more than she was comfortable being seen by. But you rode this far without noticing the border markers, which tells me your mind was somewhere else entirely. I'm curious where. That's not your concern. No, he agreed easily, it isn't. And yet here you are, in my territory, at an hour when Aluna should be safely behind her own walls, celebrating whatever occasion required that dress. His gaze moved over her, briefly, not unkindly, but with the assessing quality of someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing. You're not celebrating anything, are you? Elena said nothing. That, apparently, was answer enough. Kale, he said, when the silence had stretched long enough to become its own kind of introduction, since you're too polite to ask. I know who you are. Everyone thinks they do. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. It's rarely accurate. Ash shifted uneasily beneath her, sensing the tension of the moment, and Elena tightened the reins out of habit, buying herself a few seconds to decide what to do next. Every rational instinct told her to apologize again, to turn her mare back toward Silverfang territory, to put this strange and unsettling encounter behind her as quickly as possible. Instead, she found herself asking, "Are you going to report this to my alpha?" Something shifted in Kale's expression at that, something quick and sharp that she could not quite read. Should I? I don't know what the protocol is when Aluna wanders onto enemy land at midnight. We're not enemies, Kale said. We're neighbors who have simply never found a reason to speak. That's a different thing entirely. He tilted his head slightly, studying her in a way that made her feel, uncomfortably, as though he could see straight through the careful composure she had built over the last hour. Something happened tonight. It was not a question. Elena considered lying, considered offering some vague excuse about a restless mare, or a need for fresh air, but something about the directness of his attention made pretense feel exhausting, and she was, above all else tonight, exhausted. My mate gave my Luna ring to his mistress, she said, in front of our entire pack, tonight. The words hung in the clearing between them, stark and strange in the moonlight, and Elena watched Kale's face carefully, bracing herself for pity, or worse, amusement. Neither came. What crossed his expression instead was something closer to genuine surprise, followed quickly by a coldness that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the man she had just described. That's a particular kind of cruelty, he said finally, dressing humiliation up as ceremony. You understand it exactly, Elena said, and something in her chest loosened slightly, hearing her own experience named so precisely by a stranger. I've seen cruelty wear many disguises. His voice carried a weight that suggested history behind the words, though he offered no further explanation, and Elena did not ask. You rode out here alone, in the dark, into unfamiliar territory, rather than stay and let your pack see you break. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. That's not weakness, Kale said, watching her with an intensity that made her feel, for the first time in hours, genuinely seen rather than simply observed. Most people, in your position, would have shattered in that hall for everyone to witness. You walked out with your spine straight and rode into the dark instead. That takes a particular kind of strength most wolves I know don't possess. Elena did not know what to say to that. She had spent the last several hours feeling like the punchline of a joke the entire pack had been let in on before her. To hear her actions described as strength, by a stranger with no reason to flatter her, unsettled something in her chest that she was not prepared to examine too closely. I should go, she said quietly. You should, Kale agreed. The border isn't safe for a Silverfang wolf alone at night, and not because of me. He stepped back, giving her a clear path toward the trees, though his eyes stayed on her the entire time, steady and unreadable. But if you ever find yourself out here again, for whatever reason, you won't find a threat waiting for you. Only a neighbor who understands, better than most, what it costs to watch someone you trusted choose someone else. Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the danger every story about him had promised her she would find, and found instead only quiet understanding, the kind that unsettled her more than any threat could have. Thank you, she said finally, and turned Ash toward the trees. She did not look back as she crossed the border into Silverfang territory again, though she could feel his eyes on her the entire ride home, and something about that awareness felt less like danger, and more, unsettlingly, like the first honest moment of an otherwise humiliating night. Morning arrived at Silverfang territory the way bad news always does, quietly at first, then all at once. Elena had barely slept. She lay awake most of the night replaying the Great Hall, replaying the clearing, replaying the strange steadiness in Cale's voice when he told her that walking away had not been weakness. By the time the sun rose over the eastern ridge, she had made peace with exactly nothing, but she had at least decided how she intended to face the day. She would not hide. She would not cry where anyone could see her, and she would not, under any circumstances, allow Damon to believe that his cruelty had broken something in her that could not be repaired. The summons came before she had even finished dressing. Nora delivered it personally, her expression tight with the particular anxiety of someone who has spent all night worrying and arrived at no comfortable conclusions. "The elders want you in the council chamber within the hour," Nora said. "Damon will be there, and Vanessa." "Of course she will," Elena said, fastening the last button of her gray tunic, the kind of practical, unremarkable clothing that felt like armor after the elaborate dress from the night before. "She'll want to see how this plays out." "Elena, I have to ask, are you all right?" Elena considered the question honestly before answering, because Nora deserved honesty, even when Elena did not entirely have it to give. "I don't know yet. I know I'm angry. I know I'm humiliated. But underneath all of that, I think I'm also relieved, and I don't fully understand why." "Relieved?" 15 years is a long time to wonder if something is wrong, without ever having proof. Elena smoothed the front of her tunic, meeting her own eyes in the mirror with a steadiness that surprised her. "Now I have proof. That's an ugly kind of gift, but it's a gift all the same." The council chamber was full when she arrived, more full than any ordinary pack matter would warrant, which told Elena immediately that this was not being treated as a private family dispute. It was being treated as a political crisis, and political crises, she knew from years of watching Damon navigate them, were rarely resolved in favor of the person who had been wronged. Damon sat at the head of the long table, his expression carefully composed, the expression of a man who had rehearsed his defense on the walk over. Vanessa sat beside him, not behind him, not to the side in the deferential position a mistress might once have occupied, but directly beside him, as though the seating arrangement itself was meant to announce something. Elena took the seat across from them without waiting to be invited, and let the silence stretch until the eldest of the council, a stern gray-haired woman named Ruth, finally spoke. "Luna Elena, we understand last night was distressing." "Distressing," Elena repeated. "That's an interesting word for a public humiliation staged in front of 40 witnesses." "Elena," Damon started. "Don't." Her voice did not rise, but something in it cut through the room regardless, and Damon fell silent. "You do not get to soften this with tone right now. You gave away the ring your grandmother wore. My ring. To the woman you've apparently been seeing behind my back for however long this has been happening. In front of our entire pack. There is no version of that story, where I am the one who overreacted." Ruth exchanged a glance with the other council members before speaking again, carefully. "The council's concern is stability. A public dissolution of the Alpha and Luna bond, especially handled poorly, could destabilize the pack at a vulnerable time. We're hoping to find a resolution that preserves unity." "Unity," Elena said, and this time she did laugh, though there was no humor in the sound. "You mean you want me to accept this quietly so the pack doesn't see how badly it's been mismanaged?" "That's not fair," Damon said. "Isn't it?" Elena turned to face him fully for the first time since entering the room. "Tell me what would be fair, Damon. Tell me what resolution you were imagining walking in here today. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you expected me to accept a lesser position in my own marriage, quietly, so you could keep both the wife who gives you legitimacy and the woman you actually want." Vanessa's composure slipped for the first time, a flicker of something sharp crossing her expression before she smoothed it away. "That's not how it is." "Then how is it?" Elena said, turning her attention to Vanessa directly. "Explain it to me, because from where I stood last night, watching you wear my ring in front of my pack, it looked exactly like that." Nobody answered. The silence in the chamber grew thick and uncomfortable, and Elena let it sit there, unwilling to fill it with the kind of gracious deflection everyone in that room seemed to be waiting for. Ruth cleared her throat finally, choosing her words with the caution of someone navigating a minefield. Perhaps, given time, a private arrangement could be reached. One that allows Damon to fulfill his obligations to the pack while addressing the personal matters separately. "You're asking me to share my husband," Elena said flatly. "We're asking you to consider what's best for Silverfang," Ruth said. "I have considered it." Elena stood, and the movement itself seemed to change the atmosphere of the room, forcing every eye toward her. What's best for Silverfang is a Luna who is respected, not one who is asked to accept public humiliation for the sake of political convenience. If this council believes otherwise, then perhaps this council has already decided it no longer wants me in this role, and simply lacks the courage to say so directly. "That's not what anyone is suggesting," Damon said, and for the first time, something like genuine alarm entered his voice. "Then what are you suggesting, Damon? Because I've listened for the last 10 minutes and heard nothing, except everyone in this room trying to find a way to keep your indiscretion quiet, without actually asking you to give anything up." He had no answer for that. Elena watched him search for one, watched the practiced calm slip from his expression as he realized, perhaps for the first time since the night before, that this was not a problem he could smooth over with charm and careful phrasing the way he handled most pack disputes. "I need time," Elena said finally, into the silence he had left behind. "Time to decide what I want, separate from what this council wants, separate from what's convenient for either of you. I would suggest you use that time to think carefully about what you actually value, Damon, because right now I'm not entirely certain you know." She left the chamber without waiting for a response, and if her hands trembled slightly as she walked down the long corridor toward the courtyard, at least no one there was left to see it. Outside, the day was bright and unbothered by the wreckage of the night before, and Elena found herself walking without direction, past the training yards, past the healer's cottage, where Grace looked up from her herbs with an expression of quiet, unspoken support, until she reached the edge of the property, the same tree line she had crossed just hours earlier. She thought about Cale's voice in the clearing, about the steadiness of it, the total absence of pity, the way he had named her strength instead of her humiliation. She had spent 15 years being managed by men who spoke to her carefully, who chose their words to keep the peace, who treated honesty as something to be rationed. Cale had simply told her the truth, plainly, without softening it or sharpening it for effect. It was, she realized with some discomfort, the most honest conversation she had had with anyone in longer than she wanted to admit. She did not decide, standing there at the border, to return to Nightshade territory. Not yet. But she understood, with the same quiet clarity that had carried her out of the Great Hall the night before, that something in her had already begun measuring the life she had against the brief glimpse of something else she had been offered in that moonlit clearing, and the comparison was not landing in favor of the life she knew. 3 days passed before Elena returned to the border, and she told herself each time that it was simply for the quiet, for the space away from a pack house that had begun to feel less like home and more like a stage she was expected to perform on. She rode out each evening as the sun dropped low over the ridge, and each evening she found Cale waiting somewhere near the clearing, never crowding her, never pretending their conversations were anything other than what they were, two people who had stumbled into an unlikely understanding, under circumstances neither of them had chosen. "Your council still hasn't resolved anything," Cale observed on the third evening, watching her dismount with the easy attentiveness of someone who noticed details others missed. "I can see it in your face. You're carrying the same weight you had the first night." "They want me to accept a private arrangement," Elena said, settling onto the flat stone near the clearing's edge, that had become, without either of them acknowledging it directly, their meeting place. "Damon keeps his position, keeps Vanessa, and I keep my title, as long as I don't make things difficult. And if you refuse? Then apparently I destabilize the pack during a vulnerable political moment, and everyone will remember me as the Luna who couldn't put the greater good above her own pride." Elena picked a blade of grass and turned it between her fingers, watching the last light fade over the tree line. "It's a very effective trap. Agree, and I lose my dignity. Refuse, and I lose my reputation." "Those aren't actually the only two options," Cale said. "No? You could leave." He said it simply, without drama, the way he seemed to say most things, as though the idea had occurred to him fully formed and required no embellishment to be understood. Not stay and fight a political battle you didn't create, and not stay and quietly accept humiliation either. Just leave. Elena laughed, though the sound held little humor. Leave to where, exactly? A Luna without a pack isn't simply unemployed, Kale. She's vulnerable. Every wolf who's ever resented Silverfang's territory would see me as an opportunity. Not if you left for a place with enough strength that no one would dare see it as an opportunity. Something in his tone made her look up sharply, and she found him watching her with an expression she had not yet seen from him, something more deliberate than the careful neutrality he usually offered. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything you're not ready to hear, Kale said. I'm simply pointing out that you keep describing your situation as though you have only two choices, when the truth is, you have exactly as many choices as you're willing to consider. Elena studied him in the fading light, trying to read the calculation behind his words, because surely there had to be some. No alpha offered sanctuary to another pack's Luna without an angle, without some benefit he intended to extract from the arrangement. She had learned that lesson from watching Damon manage alliances for years. Nothing came free, especially not from a man who ruled a territory as feared as this one. What would you want, she asked carefully, if I did consider it? Kale's expression did not change, but something in the stillness of him sharpened, as though her question had touched something he had been waiting for her to ask. Not what you're imagining. I'm not interested in claiming a wounded Luna to embarrass a rival pack, if that's the calculation you're running. I've watched you these past 3 nights. You don't need rescuing. You need somewhere your strength isn't a threat to anyone's fragile pride. That's a very generous description of a stranger you've known for 3 evenings. I don't offer generosity easily, Kale said. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm offering this because I recognize something in you that I don't often see, and I don't intend to watch it get quietly extinguished by a pack too cowardly to protect its own Luna. Elena said nothing for a long moment, letting his words settle into the quiet space between them, the crickets beginning their evening chorus in the tall grass, the moon rising slow and pale over the ridge. She thought about the council chamber, about Ruth's careful phrasing, and Damon's silence, and Vanessa's flicker of satisfaction. She thought about 15 years of being managed, softened, deferred to, only when it was convenient. I'm not ready to decide anything tonight, she said finally. I didn't ask you to. Kale rose, extending a hand to help her up from the stone, and Elena hesitated only a moment before accepting it, feeling the steadiness of his grip, the same steadiness that seemed to define everything about him. When you are ready, you'll know where to find me. Until then, I'll keep meeting you at this border, if that's what you need. Why? Elena asked, before she could stop herself. Why does any of this matter to you? Kale considered the question with the same careful attention he gave everything, and for a moment, Elena thought he might deflect it entirely, offer some vague political explanation, and leave the real answer unspoken. Because I know what it costs to be underestimated by people who claim to love you, he said instead, quietly, and something in his voice carried a weight of old history he did not elaborate on. I don't intend to watch it happen to someone who's already recognized what it looks like, and still had the strength to walk away from the hall instead of breaking in front of everyone who wanted to see it. Elena rode back to Silverfang territory that night, with his words circling in her mind, unable to quiet the growing certainty that the life waiting for her behind those familiar walls no longer fit the way it once had, like a dress worn too many times, familiar, but constricting in ways she had simply grown accustomed to ignoring. She did not sleep well that night either, but for the first time since the humiliation in the Great Hall, her sleeplessness carried something other than grief. It carried the uncomfortable, electric edge of a decision beginning to form, slowly, the way decisions of real consequence always seem to, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the quiet accumulation of small realizations she could no longer talk herself out of noticing. The council summoned her again on the 7th day, and this time, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted into something colder, more impatient, the polite caution of the first meeting, replaced by the thin edge of frustration people show when a problem has not resolved itself as quickly as they hoped. We need an answer, Elena, Ruth said, without the softening pleasantries of the week before. The longer this remains unresolved, the more the pack talks, and talk of this kind weakens us in front of neighboring territories. Then perhaps, Elena said evenly, The pack should direct its concern toward the Alpha who created this situation, rather than the Luna he humiliated. Damon shifted in his seat, and Elena noted, with a strange detachment, how much smaller he seemed in that chamber than he had a week earlier. Power, she was learning, was a fragile thing when it depended on other people's willingness to keep looking away from your failures. "I've spoken with Vanessa," Damon said carefully. "She's agreed to take a lesser position, publicly. Nothing acknowledged, nothing announced. You would remain Luna in every formal sense. The rest could remain private. You want me to pretend nothing happened. I want to fix this." "You want to hide it," Elena corrected. "There's a difference, Damon, and I'm surprised you don't see it, given how carefully you've managed every other political problem in this pack for the last decade." Vanessa, seated beside him as she had been in the first meeting, finally spoke, her voice carrying none of the confidence she had shown in the Great Hall. "This isn't only about you, Elena. Damon and I." "Do not," Elena said, and something in her tone made even Ruth glance up sharply. "Finish that sentence in this room, as though I owe either of you the patience to hear it." The chamber fell silent. Elena looked around the table slowly, at Ruth's carefully neutral expression, at the other council members who had said almost nothing throughout both meetings, content to let the situation resolve itself without their fingerprints on the outcome, at Damon, who would not meet her eyes, and at Vanessa, whose composure had finally begun to crack under the weight of a decision she had clearly not expected to cost her anything. "I've made my decision," Elena said finally, and the words came easier than she expected, as though some part of her had already known, for days now, exactly what she intended to say. "And?" Ruth asked. "I won't accept a private arrangement that asks me to share a title with a woman my mate chose to humiliate me for. I won't pretend, publicly or privately, that what happened in that hall was a misunderstanding that can be quietly managed away." Elena stood, and the movement carried none of the trembling uncertainty of the first meeting. "This council has made it clear, through a week of careful deflection, that stability matters more to you than the dignity of the Luna you're supposedly protecting. I understand that. I even, in a strange way, respect the honesty of it, now that it's finally being spoken plainly, instead of dressed up as concern for my well-being." "Elena, please," Damon said, and for the first time all week, something raw entered his voice. Something that might have moved her a month ago. It did not move her now. "Don't do anything rash." "I'm not doing anything rash," Elena said. "I'm doing the opposite. I've spent a week thinking very carefully about what I want, and what I've decided is that I no longer want to be a Luna whose dignity is negotiable whenever it becomes politically inconvenient." She looked at Ruth. "Whatever happens next, know that I did not choose this outcome carelessly. It was chosen for me, in that hall, the night Damon decided my ring belonged on someone else's hand." She left the chamber a final time, and this time, the walk down the corridor felt different, lighter somehow, as though something that had been pressing against her chest for a week had finally released its grip. Nora was waiting outside, having clearly heard some version of the meeting already, judging by the tight worry in her expression. "What did you decide?" Elena looked at her cousin for a long moment, weighing how much to say, before deciding that Nora, of everyone in that pack, deserved the truth. "I'm leaving, Nora, not tonight, but soon. I can't stay in a place that asks me to shrink myself to preserve someone else's comfort." "Leaving to where?" Elena hesitated, but only briefly. "I don't know yet, exactly. But I know it isn't here." She did not tell Nora about Kale that day, not because she doubted her cousin's discretion, but because the decision still felt too new, too fragile, to survive being spoken aloud before she had fully claimed it for herself. She simply held it close, the way you hold a small flame against wind, and let the week continue around her, the whispers in the pack house, the careful glances from elders who no longer knew quite how to treat her, the growing certainty in her own chest that whatever came next would be better than what she was leaving behind. That evening, she rode out to the border again, and found Kale waiting, as he had every evening for the past week, though this time, something in his expression shifted the moment he saw her face. "You've decided," he said, before she had even dismounted. "I have. And—" Elena swung down from Ash's back, meeting his gaze steadily in the fading evening light, and for the first time since the humiliation in the Great Hall, she felt something that was not grief, not anger, not even relief, but something closer to certainty. "I need time to prepare," she said, "to leave quietly, without giving the council or Damon a chance to make this harder than it needs to be. But when I'm ready, if the offer still stands—" "It stands," Cale said simply, before she could even finish the sentence, and something in the quiet immediacy of his answer settled a fear she had not realized she was still carrying, the fear that his offer had been a fleeting kindness rather than a genuine one. "Then I'm asking you to help me," Elena said, "not because I need rescuing, because I need somewhere to land that won't ask me to make myself smaller to be welcome there." Cale studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression, quiet and steady as always, carried a warmth she had not seen from him before. "You'll never need to make yourself smaller in Nightshade territory, Elena. That was never on offer, and it never will be." Preparing to leave quietly proved more difficult than Elena had anticipated, not because of any single obstacle, but because of the accumulated weight of 15 years, the small daily habits and belongings and relationships that could not simply be packed into a single saddlebag and carried away in one night. She began slowly, in the days that followed, sorting through what mattered from what did not. Her mother's old letters, kept in a wooden box beneath her bed since before her marriage to Damon, mattered. The elaborate formal gowns Damon had commissioned for pack ceremonies did not. The small silver hairpin Grace had given her the year she became Luna, a gift between friends rather than a symbol of status, mattered a great deal. The wedding portrait that hung above the hearth in her private chambers did not. She worked carefully, deliberately, never taking more than she could explain away if questioned, tucking small items into a travel bag she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her closet, a hiding place she had used as a girl in the Ashwood pack and had apparently never fully outgrown. Grace noticed first, as Elena had known she eventually would, given how closely the two had worked together over the years, tending to the pack's sick and injured. She found Elena in the healer's cottage one afternoon, sorting through a small collection of dried herbs with unusual focus. "You're leaving," Grace said, without preamble, setting down the mortar and pestle she had been using. Elena did not bother denying it. "How did you know? You've been saying goodbye for a week without using the word. I noticed you gave Nora your grandmother's shawl yesterday. You don't give away things like that unless you don't expect to need them here anymore." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "I should have known better than to think I could hide anything from you." "Where will you go?" Grace asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only genuine concern, the kind Elena had come to rely on over the years, without fully realizing how much she needed it. Elena hesitated, but Grace had earned honesty many times over. Nightshade territory. Grace's eyebrows rose slightly, though she did not look shocked. Exactly. More like someone recalibrating an assumption she had been carrying. The Dark Alpha. "Cale," Elena said, and something in the way she said his name, plainly, without the fear the pack usually attached to it, seemed to answer a question Grace had not yet asked aloud. "Do you trust him?" "I don't fully know him yet," Elena admitted. "But I trust that he's told me the truth every time we've spoken, which is more than I can say for the man I've been married to for 3 years. Grace considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then I trust your judgment. You've always read people better than you give yourself credit for, Elena. You saw through Vanessa's smile before anyone said a word about her and Damon. Some part of you probably knew, long before that night in the hall." "I think I did," Elena admitted quietly. "I think I just didn't want to know it." "When are you leaving?" 3 days. There's a council gathering the night after next, a formal dinner marking the founding anniversary. Everyone will be occupied with ceremony and celebration. It's the best opportunity to leave without drawing immediate attention. Grace reached across the work table and took Elena's hand, squeezing it once, firmly. "Be careful, and if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me." "I know," Elena said, and for the first time since the humiliation in the Great Hall, she allowed herself a few quiet tears, not of grief, but of gratitude, for a friendship that had survived where a marriage had not. The 2 days that followed passed in a strange blur of ordinary pack life, continuing around Elena as though nothing had changed, while inside her, everything had already shifted toward the future waiting on the other side of the border. She attended a training session with the younger pack members, taught a healing lesson alongside Grace, sat through a brief council meeting where Ruth updated everyone on unrelated territorial matters, and through it all, she carried the quiet secret of her departure like a stone in her pocket, present but invisible to everyone around her. Damon tried twice more to speak with her privately, and both times Elena declined, not out of anger exactly, though there was still plenty of that, but because she understood now that further conversation would only delay a decision she had already made. There was nothing left for them to discuss that would change the outcome, and she had grown tired, in the space of a single week, of conversations that circled endlessly, without ever arriving anywhere honest. On the evening of the founding anniversary dinner, Elena dressed carefully, choosing a simple dark riding outfit beneath a formal outer robe that she could discard easily once she was clear of the pack house. She attended the early portion of the ceremony, exchanging pleasantries with pack members who had no idea they were watching their Luna say a final, silent goodbye. And when the wine had flowed long enough and the attention of the hall had turned fully toward music and celebration, she slipped away quietly, unnoticed, the way she had learned, over 15 years of careful political life, to move through a room without drawing eyes she did not want on her. Nora met her at the stables, as they had arranged in a hushed conversation 2 nights earlier, her expression a careful mixture of sadness and something that looked almost like pride. "I still think you should say goodbye properly," Nora said, helping Elena secure the last of her belongings to Ash's saddle. "If I say goodbye properly, someone will try to stop me," Elena said. "Or worse, they'll succeed in making me doubt myself, and I can't afford that tonight." "I understand." Nora hugged her tightly, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "Send word when you're settled, please. I need to know you're safe." "I will," Elena promised, and meant it. She swung up onto Ash's back one final time within Silverfang territory, looking back briefly at the lit windows of the pack house, at the muffled sound of music and laughter drifting across the lawn, at 15 years of a life that had, in the end, asked more of her dignity than it had ever offered in return. Then she turned Ash toward the tree line, toward the border, toward the dark and uncertain territory that had somehow, in the space of a single humiliating week, come to feel less like danger, and more like the first honest chance she had been given in years. She did not look back again, as she rode into the night. Cale was waiting at the border, exactly as he had promised he would be, though Elena had not sent word ahead, had not needed to, because some quiet understanding had grown between them over the past 2 weeks, that told each of them where and when the other would be found. He did not ask if she was certain. He did not offer the kind of hollow reassurance people often reach for in moments of consequence. He simply nodded once, taking in the travel bag secured to her saddle, the resolve settled clearly across her face, and turned his horse toward the deeper heart of Nightshade territory. "Ride close," he said. "The border patrols know to expect me, but not a stranger beside me, not yet. I'll make the introductions once we're past the outer checkpoints." Elena nodded, urging Ash forward to keep pace with him, and for a while they rode in silence through the dark forest, the trees here thicker and older than anything she had known on the Silverfang side of the border, the air carrying a colder, sharper scent that she was beginning to associate, oddly, with something like freedom. "You're quiet," Cale observed eventually. "I'm trying to decide if I've made the right choice," Elena admitted. "Not about leaving. I'm certain about that. About coming here, specifically." "Doubt is reasonable," Cale said. "You're trusting your safety to a man you've known for 2 weeks, in territory your entire life has taught you to fear. I'd think less of you if you weren't at least a little uncertain. Are you ever uncertain?" Something almost like amusement touched his expression, brief and fleeting in the moonlight. "More often than most people would guess. I've simply learned not to let it show. The same way you learned to walk out of that hall with your spine straight, instead of breaking in front of everyone watching." They reached the first checkpoint perhaps 20 minutes later, where 2 nightshade wolves stood guard at a narrow crossing point, their postures shifting instantly to alert attention at the sight of their alpha, before settling into careful curiosity at the sight of the stranger riding beside him. "This is Elena," Cale said simply, offering no further explanation, and something in the way he said her name, without qualifiers or titles, made Elena's chest tighten unexpectedly. "She'll be staying in Nightshade territory. Treat her with the respect you'd offer any guest under my protection." The guards nodded, offering Elena polite, if wary greetings, and Elena found herself studying their reactions carefully, searching for any sign of the cruelty or menace the stories about Kale's pack had always promised her she would find. She found none, only ordinary wolves, doing ordinary work, treating their alpha with a respect that seemed rooted in something steadier than fear. "They don't seem afraid of you," Elena observed once they had ridden past the checkpoint. "Should they be? The stories say they should be. Stories are usually told by people who benefit from being feared themselves," Kale said, something dry entering his tone. "It's easier to convince your own pack that the neighboring territory is full of monsters than to explain why your own alpha struggles to keep order without cruelty. Fear of Nightshade has been useful to more than one pack over the years, mine included, if I'm honest. I've never gone out of my way to correct the reputation." "Why not?" "Because a reputation for danger keeps most conflicts from ever reaching my border in the first place," Kale said. "It's a strange kind of peace, built on fear rather than trust, but it's kept my pack safer than most, and I've learned not to be too proud to use whatever tools keep my people alive." Elena considered this as they continued riding deeper into the territory, past small clusters of homes with warm light glowing in their windows, past training yards quiet in the late hour, past a landscape that looked, in every practical sense, remarkably similar to the Silverfang territory she had left behind, except for the particular quality of stillness that seemed to follow Kale wherever he moved. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect?" "Something colder, crueler." She glanced at him, studying the sharp lines of his profile in the moonlight, the quiet steadiness that seemed to define every movement he made. "The stories painted a very different picture than what I've seen tonight." "Give it time," Kale said, though something in his tone suggested he was not entirely joking. "I have my own share of darkness, Elena. I won't pretend otherwise, and I'd rather you see it clearly than discover it later and feel deceived. But whatever darkness lives in me, it's never been turned against someone who hasn't earned it, and it will never be turned against you." They arrived at the pack house perhaps another 20 minutes later, a structure built from dark timber and stone that seemed to rise out of the surrounding forest rather than stand apart from it, imposing in a way that felt less like intimidation and more like permanence, the architectural equivalent of a promise that had been kept for generations. Kale helped her down from Ash's back himself, his hand steady beneath hers, and for a moment they stood close together in the courtyard, the weight of the last 2 weeks settling between them in a silence that felt, for the first time, less like tension and more like something closer to understanding. "You'll have your own quarters," Kale said, stepping back and gesturing toward the pack house. "Private, secure. No one will enter without your permission, myself included. I know what it means to leave everything behind for the uncertainty of somewhere new, and I won't ask you to trust me faster than you're ready to." "Thank you," Elena said quietly, and meant it more deeply than the simple words could carry. "Don't thank me yet," Kale said, something almost gentle entering his usually measured tone. "Thank me once you've had a chance to see whether this place actually deserves the trust you've placed in it. Words are easy to offer. I'd rather earn yours slowly, the way it should be earned." Elena followed him into the pack house, leaving Ash in the care of a young stable hand who greeted her with easy warmth, and as she crossed the threshold into Nightshade territory for the second time, this time, not as a trespasser slipping quietly through the dark, but as someone who had been formally welcomed, she felt something in her chest finally begin to loosen after 2 weeks of carrying grief and humiliation, like a weight she had not been permitted to set down. Whatever waited for her here, she thought, walking beside a man the world called dark and dangerous, but who had shown her nothing but steady honesty since the night they met, it could not possibly be worse than what she had left behind. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she found herself looking forward to what came next, rather than simply enduring it. News of Elena's disappearance reached Silverfang territory by mid-morning, and by afternoon, the pack house had descended into a controlled chaos that Damon had never once, in 10 years as Alpha, experienced from the inside of his own home. Nora, questioned first and most extensively, gave nothing away, sticking carefully to the story she and Elena had agreed upon 2 nights earlier, that Elena had mentioned wanting time alone, time to think, without specifying where or for how long. It was not entirely a lie, and it brought exactly the amount of confusion Elena had hoped it would. Damon, however, was not fooled for long. He had known Elena for 15 years, had learned the particular rhythms of her moods and decisions well enough to recognize, almost immediately, that this was not a woman who had wandered off to clear her head. This was a woman who had left, deliberately, and left no trail behind her that anyone at Silverfang could easily follow. Where would she go? He asked Ruth that evening, pacing the length of his study with an agitation that surprised even himself. She has no family outside this pack, no close allies in neighboring territories. Where would Aluna simply disappear to? Perhaps, Ruth said carefully. She didn't disappear to anywhere specific. Perhaps she simply needed to be somewhere you couldn't reach her. Damon stopped pacing, turning to face the older woman with an expression she had rarely seen on him, something close to real fear. You think she's not coming back? I think, Ruth said, with the blunt honesty of someone who had watched too many political crises unfold to soften the truth any further, that you handled this situation with remarkably little regard for the woman who has stood beside you for 15 years. And I think it would be foolish to assume she'll simply forgive that, because enough time has passed. The words landed harder than Ruth perhaps intended, and Damon sat down heavily in the chair behind his desk, running a hand over his face, in a gesture of genuine, unguarded distress that few in the pack had witnessed from their alpha before. By the third day, whispers had begun to spread through the pack in the particular, unstoppable way that whispers always do, regardless of how carefully a leadership tries to contain them. Some said the Luna had simply left to visit distant relatives. Others, closer to the truth without quite reaching it, suggested she had sought refuge with another pack entirely, though none dared guess which one. Vanessa found the whispers particularly uncomfortable, especially once it became clear that her own position within the pack had shifted in ways she had not anticipated. Where before her relationship with Damon had been an open secret, whispered about with a kind of scandalized fascination, it now carried the weight of consequence, of a decision that had cost the pack its Luna, and pack members who had once regarded her with cautious curiosity, now regarded her with something closer to blame. They're looking at me like I did something wrong, Vanessa said to Damon one evening, her voice carrying an edge of frustration that had not been present during the confident triumph of the founding ceremony. You did do something wrong, Damon said, and the words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her, as though some part of him had only just allowed himself to acknowledge it plainly. We both did. I let this happen for months without ever considering what it would cost her. And now she's gone, and I have no idea where, and I don't know how to fix something I don't fully understand the size of. Vanessa said nothing to that, because there was, perhaps for the first time in this entire situation, nothing comfortable left to say. The council convened again by the end of the week, this time without Elena present, to challenge their careful language, and the conversation that followed was markedly different in tone, stripped of the political caution that had characterized the first two meetings, replaced instead by genuine concern over what her absence meant for the pack's stability. We need to find her, Ruth said plainly. Not to force her return necessarily, but we need to know she's safe, and we need to understand what her absence means for the future leadership of this pack. I'll search personally, Damon said. Search where? One of the other elders asked. She could be anywhere. Any territory. Any distant relative's home. Any hidden corner of the region. It was a young scout, returning from routine patrol along the northern border, who finally brought word that shifted the conversation entirely, 3 days later, reporting almost as an afterthought that Nightshade border patrols had increased noticeably in recent weeks, and that unconfirmed rumors from wolves, who traded occasionally across territory lines, suggested the Dark Alpha had taken in a guest of some significance, a woman, though details beyond that remained frustratingly vague. Damon received this news in silence, sitting very still in his study long after the scout had left, turning the information over in his mind, with a dawning, uncomfortable understanding of exactly what it meant. Nightshade territory. Of all the places Elena could have gone, of all the alliances she could have sought, she had chosen the one territory that made every political calculation Damon might have made to retrieve her instantly, dangerously complicated. She wouldn't, he said aloud, to no one, though even as he said it, he understood, with a certainty that settled cold in his chest, that she absolutely would, and had. Whatever fear or respect he had once held for the rumors surrounding the Dark Alpha King, they had never once, in 10 years of careful territorial diplomacy, felt as immediate or as personal as they did in that moment, sitting alone in his study, realizing that the woman he had humiliated in front of his entire pack had walked straight into the one place he could not easily follow, and had apparently been welcomed there, without hesitation. For the first time since the night of the founding ceremony, Damon began to understand that the consequences of his choices were not going to fade quietly with time, the way he had perhaps unconsciously assumed they would. They were, instead, only beginning to reveal how deep they truly ran, and how little control he had left over what happened next. Elena's first weeks in Nightshade territory unfolded slowly, in a way that felt, to her own surprise, less like exile and more like something she had not realized she was missing for years. Cale kept his word about her quarters, private and secure, and he kept a distance that felt respectful rather than cold, checking on her welfare through small, thoughtful gestures rather than direct demands on her time. A basket of fresh bread appeared outside her door most mornings, left by a kitchen hand she later learned had been instructed personally by Cale to make sure she never went without. A quiet invitation to join the pack's evening meal arrived each night, one she was free to accept or decline without consequence, and increasingly, she found herself accepting. The Nightshade pack, she discovered over those first weeks, bore little resemblance to the stories that had frightened Silverfang children for generations. They were disciplined, certainly, and there was a watchfulness to them that spoke of a territory that had survived real danger in its past. But cruelty, the kind she had half expected to find lurking beneath the surface, simply was not there. In its place was something closer to fierce, quiet loyalty, the kind built not through fear, but through an alpha, who had clearly earned his pack's trust through consistency rather than intimidation. She spent her mornings, at first, simply learning the rhythms of the territory, walking the training yards, observing the healers' work, familiarizing herself with a place that would, she was beginning to understand, become permanent rather than temporary. By the third week, Grace's counterpart within Nightshade territory, a sharp, capable healer named Liana, had welcomed Elena's help without hesitation, recognizing quickly that the newcomer's knowledge of herbal remedies rivaled her own. "You have good hands," Liana told her one afternoon, watching Elena work through a complicated wound treatment with the same careful precision she had once brought to Silverfang's healing cottage. "Cale said you might be useful here, but I confess I didn't expect quite this much skill." "I spent years working alongside my pack's healer," Elena said. "It became something I was good at, eventually, even if it started as a duty rather than a passion." "It's not a duty here," Liana said. "Not unless you want it to be. You're welcome to whatever role suits you, for as long as you stay." The phrase "for as long as you stay" settled into Elena's chest with unexpected weight, because she realized, turning it over in her mind, that she had not yet consciously decided how long that would be. She had arrived seeking refuge, safety, distance from a life that had wounded her. She had not, until that moment, considered that Nightshade territory might become something more permanent than a place to heal, before deciding what came next. Her conversations with Cale, in the weeks that followed, grew more frequent and less formal, evolving from careful evening exchanges near the border clearing into something closer to genuine companionship. He sought her opinion on territorial matters occasionally, not out of obligation, but out of what seemed like real curiosity about her perspective, and she found herself, more often than she expected, offering insight drawn from 15 years of watching Damon manage Silverfang's political affairs, insight that Cale received with genuine consideration, rather than the dismissive politeness she had grown accustomed to. "You have a talent for this," he told her one evening, after she had offered a solution to a minor trade dispute with a neighboring territory that had been troubling his council for days. "Political instinct isn't something that can be taught easily. You either have it, or you spend years learning to fake it convincingly." "I spent 15 years watching from the side of a room, mostly," Elena said. "I suppose some of it was bound to stick." "It's more than that," Cale said, studying her with the quiet attentiveness that had become familiar over the weeks. "You see angles most people miss, because you've spent years being underestimated enough to notice everything happening around you, even when no one bothered asking your opinion directly." Elena considered that observation for a long moment, surprised by how precisely it captured something she had never fully articulated, even to herself. "I didn't realize how much I'd been holding back until I came here, and someone actually asked what I thought." "That will change now," Cale said simply. Whatever role you choose to take here, whatever you decide you want your life to look like, it won't involve being an afterthought in your own decisions. I promise you that. Word of Elena's whereabouts, inevitably, eventually reached wider circulation, despite the discretion both Cale and Elena had tried to maintain in the early weeks. A trading caravan passing between territories carried the rumor further than either of them intended, and by the second month, it had become an open, if unofficial, understanding across the region that the former Silverfang Luna had taken refuge within Nightshade territory, welcomed personally by its alpha. The reaction across neighboring packs varied. Some viewed it with quiet approval, recognizing in Elena's decision a rare and admirable act of self-respect. Others viewed it with more calculating interest, wondering what it meant politically for the balance of power between two territories that had, for generations, maintained a careful and distant peace, built more on mutual avoidance than genuine alliance. Within Silverfang itself, the confirmation of Elena's location landed with the particular weight of a door, quietly, permanently closing. Damon, upon receiving formal word through diplomatic channels rather than rumor, understood immediately what it meant, understood that whatever chance he might have once had to repair what he had broken had likely evaporated the moment Elena chose Nightshade Sanctuary over Silverfang apology. Elena, for her part, remained largely unaware of exactly how the news traveled or how it landed across the region's various territories, focused instead on the slower, more personal work of rebuilding a life she had not expected to need to rebuild. She found herself, in quiet moments, surprised by how rarely she thought of Damon now, how the sharp, immediate pain of that night in the Great Hall had softened, over the weeks, into something more distant, a wound that had scarred over, rather than one that still actively bled. What replaced it, gradually, unmistakably, was something she had not anticipated when she rode across that border 2 months earlier, seeking only escape from a life that had humiliated her. What replaced it was the quiet, steady presence of a man who had never once asked her to be smaller, softer, or more convenient than she naturally was, and who seemed, the longer she knew him, to value precisely the qualities in her that Damon had apparently spent years quietly resenting. She was not yet certain what to call the feeling growing steadily in her chest whenever Cale entered a room, but she recognized, with the same clear-eyed honesty that had carried her out of the Silverfang Great Hall 2 months earlier, that it was becoming impossible to ignore. By the time the first snow fell over Nightshade territory, Elena had stopped counting the days since she left Silverfang land, a small but meaningful shift she noticed only in hindsight, the way you notice you have stopped limping only once someone points out you are walking normally again. She had settled fully into the rhythms of her new life by then, splitting her time between the healing cottage with Liana and the growing, informal role she had taken on advising Cale's council on matters of diplomacy and territorial strategy. The pack, once wary of the newcomer in their midst, had grown genuinely fond of her, drawn in by a warmth and competence that had nothing to do with the title she had once held, and everything to do with the person she actually was underneath it. Cale found her one evening in the small garden behind the pack house, where she had taken to spending quiet hours tending a modest collection of herbs she had started from seeds Liana helped her gather. Snow dusted the bare branches around them, and Elena's breath fogged gently in the cold evening air as she knelt beside the frost-covered soil, checking on plants that would not bloom again until spring. "You've made this place yours," Cale observed, watching her from a few steps away. "I don't think you've noticed, but you have." Elena looked up at him, brushing dirt from her hands as she rose to her feet. "I think I noticed. I just wasn't sure how to say it out loud." "You don't have to say everything out loud with me," Cale said, something gentle entering his usually measured tone. "I've learned to read you fairly well over these past months." "Have you?" Elena tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same careful attention he so often turned on her. "Then tell me what you're reading right now." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a rare uncertainty crossing features that Elena had come to associate with unwavering steadiness. "I'm reading someone who arrived here seeking safety, and found, somewhere along the way, something closer to a home. I'm reading someone I've grown to care for far more deeply than I ever expected to, when I found you standing at that border 2 months ago." Elena's heart quickened, though she kept her voice steady, matching the careful honesty he had always offered her. And if you're reading correctly, then I'd like to know if you've found room, in whatever you're rebuilding here, for something more than sanctuary. Cale stepped closer, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that carried none of the careful restraint he usually wore like armor. I'm not asking you to replace what you lost, Elena. I'm asking if you'd consider building something entirely new, with someone who has no interest in ever asking you to be smaller than you are. Elena did not answer immediately, not because she was uncertain, but because the moment felt too significant to rush through carelessly. She thought of the humiliation in the Silverfang Great Hall, of Damon's silence, of Vanessa's borrowed ring. She thought of the long ride through the dark that first night, of the strange, steady comfort she had found in a stranger's honesty when she expected only danger. She thought of 2 months spent healing in a territory that had asked nothing of her except to be exactly who she already was. I think, Elena said finally, closing the distance between them, I stopped being uncertain about this longer ago than either of us admitted. Cale's hand found hers, steady as it had been that first night at the border, and something in his expression softened into an openness Elena had rarely seen from him. Then let me ask properly. Elena of Ashwood, formerly of Silverfang, would you consider staying, not as a guest under my protection, but as Luna of Nightshade, beside me, for whatever future we choose to build together? The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks later, once the first heavy snows had settled and the pack had time to prepare a celebration worthy of the occasion, though Elena insisted, gently but firmly, on a ceremony far simpler than the elaborate spectacle Silverfang had once staged for her first mating. This time, there was no borrowed grandeur, no performance for an audience she needed to convince. There was only the quiet, genuine gathering of a pack that had welcomed her fully, witnessing a bond chosen freely by 2 people who understood, perhaps better than most, exactly what it cost to be underestimated by someone who claimed to value you. Nora traveled from Silverfang territory to attend, tears standing openly in her eyes as she watched her cousin exchange vows with a man the old stories had painted as something to fear, and found instead only steadiness and quiet devotion. Grace came as well, standing proudly beside Liana, the 2 healers who had each, in their own territories, helped hold Elena together through the hardest months of her life. Word of the union reached Silverfang territory within days, and Damon received it, by all accounts, with a silence that spoke louder than any protest could have. Whatever chance he might once have imagined remained for reconciliation had closed permanently now, sealed not by anger, but by the simple, undeniable truth of Elena's choice, made freely, without coercion, without desperation, by a woman who had rebuilt her entire life, on her own terms, rather than accepting the diminished version he had once offered her. Elena thought of him rarely now, and when she did, it was without the sharp grief that had once defined every memory of the Great Hall. What remained instead was a kind of distant clarity, the understanding that some endings, however painful in the moment, ultimately clear space for something far better to grow. She stood beside Cale months later, on a clear spring morning, watching the Nightshade pack move through their daily routines below the pack house balcony, the same territory that had once been described to her, only in whispers of fear, now simply, unmistakably, home. Any regrets? Cale asked quietly, his hand finding hers as it so often did now, a small, steady gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Elena considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything now, without the careful political calculation that had once governed every word she spoke. Only that I didn't leave sooner, she said finally, but I think, in the end, I left exactly when I was ready to, not a moment before. Cale smiled, something warm and genuine, that few outside his own pack had ever been permitted to see, and pulled her closer as the morning light spread golden across Nightshade territory. Elena had arrived here 2 seasons earlier, as a woman running from humiliation, uncertain of everything, except her own refusal to be diminished. She stood here now, as Luna, of a territory that had never once asked her to be anything less than exactly who she was, beside a man who had recognized her strength, before she had fully recognized it herself. The ring Damon had given away that night in the Great Hall belonged to a different life entirely, one she no longer mourned. The ring she wore now, simple silver set with a dark, polished stone that matched the deep quiet of nightshade forests, had been chosen freely, given freely, worn without a single doubt about where it truly belonged. She had ridden away from humiliation in the dark, uncertain of what waited for her beyond the border. What she had found, in the end, was not merely refuge, but the life she had never realized she was missing, built patiently, honestly, on ground that had never once asked her to make herself smaller to belong.